He brings a unique perspective to his work that reflects his commitment to social knowledge and community engagement, using his platform to give voice to underrepresented community. And also in his teaching work, he bridges very much that gap that is, I think, rarely bridged between teaching both at an art school but also within communities, and bringing these different communities together. In recognition of his outstanding contributions to the field, Rahman has been nominated for numerous awards, including the Changemaker Prize by the British Fashion Council in 2022 and the Outstanding Contribution Award by the British Bangladeshi Fashion Council in 2019 and again in 22. So please give a very warm welcome to Rahman. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's weird, it sounds so official hearing it like that. So I'm quite informal, so if this chat doesn't feel so formal, I apologise. But I will try to talk through my work, and obviously I did want to call it "What Role Do Creatives Have in Redesigning the World Around Them?" Because ultimately no one person can tell everyone how to do that. So I thought the best way to kind of show you is what I've done, and hopefully through telling my story you can kind of see how you can kind of tackle stuff within your worlds as well, because it's quite a big thing we're all trying to tackle here, which is across so many different issues, and a lot of the work that I do covers quite a lot of them, so please bear with me as I make my way through them, and obviously if you do have any questions as I'm saying anything, please feel free to just say, because I think it's quite nice. But yeah, so on that note, so I want to start off with this image, because actually this is one of the looks that did go into the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it was used for a lot of their campaign imagery, which for me was a big moment, because a lot of the work that I look at is especially around decolonising a lot of the arts and crafts that have left South Asia. So to then be working with one of the institutions which basically took a lot from my home country was kind of a weird space to be in, but one that I felt like was very important to do, because actually how else were my people going to see this work? And then to have this piece now in the archive forever, which is, it's weird to even think it's going to live beyond me, any children if I have, or anything like that. It's quite weird to think that this will then live in those same spaces that I was looking at archive textiles with as well. But I wanted to start right at the beginning, which is I graduated from Central St. Martin's in 2014 in fashion menswear. And when I did graduate, I was very hopeful and that I was going to do a lot, because they have a press show and they make it like such a big deal. So I was like, I made the press show, and then I kind of fell flat. And this is quite a real thing I wanted to talk about, because obviously with a lot of creative people that I know, especially after studying, you kind of hit a little dip low. You kind of like, wait, all of these hopes and dreams that was sold to me, was what's going to happen with them? And then reality hits. Then I had to take a very long break of about 4 years, where I kind of like worked at very numerous jobs, some of them in the industry, some of them not. And then that's when I really started to learn and actually see for my own eyes exactly what's in the industry, be what they're looking at it through ethically, from looking at people who look like me, people who don't look like me, from sustainability issues to climate issues to just even things around the communities that are where the brands are based. And for me, that's when I started having a conversation with the head of development at the British Fashion Council, Sarah Moa, and this is when this conversation started to start a brand, because I was seeing a lot of the problems that were happening in the industry, because I was working alongside the design makers who were making those decisions. And she very outright said to me, from my BA collection, she was like, you started problem solving, then why did you stop? And then I was like, I actually didn't have an answer for her. And then she kind of looked me straight in the eye and was just like, well, I'm here to support you. If you want to start it again, let's go. And this is ultimately what started. So I showed at London Fashion Week in 2019, and this was the first collection. And again, to follow on that conversation around artisanal skill, I was working with a lot of artisans in Bangladesh, and I collaborated with a company called Aranya, who make all the natural dyes. So everything is naturally dyed and everything is hand knitted and made using natural fibers, because I love this idea of having a textile or a garment that will die. And it sounds so harrowing to say it like that, but just to genuinely think about its death. So when I first did that collection, I really designed that circular motion where I was pulling from the earth for natural dyes and for the fibers, be it the cottons, for the yarns and for the fabrics, and then I would make with the artisans the actual prints, and then at one point, if the client ever was done with them, they will all go into the ground. And that being the premise of the first collection is how this was born. And I was quite surprised with the coverage that it got, because it being my first show, I was quite a new baby on a big roster of designers that was shown at Fashion Week. And to be honest, it kind of started the journey. And immediately straight after that, I did the International Fashion Showcase where I represented Bangladesh. This was the first time where I started to bridge a lot of those gaps that I have in my life together. So I grew up in a very small council estate in East London where I saw a lot of poverty around me, and not only poverty but a lot of class differences and ableism differences that I completely saw all the time. And so when I was given this opportunity to show at Somerset House and represent Bangladesh in Somerset House, I was like, I want to do something very different. So I wanted to showcase my heritage through remaking almost like a version of my grandma's house, but then the artwork on the walls are all with a youth group. So there's a Saturday and a weekday club for young children who are taught at home, but they're all taught at home because of different issues. They might be health issues, it might be mental health issues, it might just be a choice by the family, but that being a reason why they shouldn't be involved in the arts or have a chance to see anything that they do in a prestigious art space was why I wanted to include them. And these walls were like 12 foot high, so you walked in and you really saw all of their drawings take up the space. And then I almost wanted to be the secondary, which was weird because I know a lot of the other designers in that space were like Tebe Magugu, who obviously is doing really amazing now, Duran, and a lot of them chose to have their clothing at the forefront, but I kind of wanted the two youth groups to be at the forefront, just to highlight what world that I was coming from and what I wanted to represent as a fashion brand. And then there's a piece of furniture at the front here as well. That was with another youth group, and they with them I worked very hands-on for about 6 months, where I saw them once a week, and they were a very different group of young people to the homeschooled young kids, because these were like ex-drug dealers, and they were kids who were kind of on that brink around drug culture, and especially in East London. And I don't know if anyone has been to London, but that's a very big issue on our doorstep. And this is a youth organisation called Streets of Growth, who are very amazing, and I still work with them now. And I worked with about 12 young people, and we just let them drop in, come and have a chat. And to them, I was just an absolute stranger, which was quite nice, because obviously I was like, could just have these very honest conversations about what they wanted to do with their lives while they remade furniture. And then in the end, I used this space as an auction to sell off everything to ultimately give back to the young kids, because the hardest conversation that I was having while I was doing that, and obviously setting up the exhibition, was how do I convince someone who works within that very like bad world of drugs to say no to $4,000 a month. Like, they were making crazy money. So it's just like, how can we reposition that? And that is still a continuous conversation. And this is in 2019. I still work with them now, and to be honest, those young people are still in that world, but it takes a long time. But this was the first time for me when I really saw how I can actively make a decision in the way that my space is designed, which can ultimately help so many other people beyond me. And to be honest, the first time I really saw it was when the young people's parents were coming in, who some of them had never ever been inside Somerset House. Like, these are like very, very prestigious buildings, very old, like grandiose, very colonial feel as the second you walk in. But they were in these spaces and wearing niqabs, headscarves, and like very much in the areas that I grew up in. But then to see them in Somerset House and in this exhibition space was like the first moment I was like, okay, no, this is why like I'm doing what I'm doing. And this potentially was the start of the journey. And then this is the second collection that I did. This is when it really started to hit this wall for me, and this is me being very honest, because the fashion industry expects from London designers to kind of move very fast, and and I didn't like it. So this was the last collection that I showed at London Fashion Week, because after this I tapped out. And the reason why I tapped out, and I wanted to, because obviously I wanted to produce a collection that felt a lot more modern, a lot more contemporary, a lot more like the friends that I have around me. But the bit that I didn't like was the speed at which things were being thrown out. So even though I was like pushed forward as a sustainable designer, circular designer, a brown Muslim gay design, all of these things that was working really well for the industry, they were still expecting me to work at a speed that was very unsustainable for both me and my health. And then I had to have a very honest conversation and be like, I don't think that's what I want to do. So then I stepped away from all that, but that was the last collection. And then what I did go towards was the artisanal skill, because I was like, and I kept having this conversation throughout, is that what's the intention of what I'm doing? Was the intention of making collections to sell loads and make loads of money? It wasn't. For me, it was about the artisans. It was about highlighting the people that I work with in Bangladesh who work with natural dye and innovate their textiles in order to make things. So like everything here is naturally dyed, and the middle look I'm extremely proud of, because it was like double-sided silk that was completely like pea silk, and a really lovely soft pink, which took, I know it looks really simple, but with natural dye it's very hard to get a pink like that and a blue like that. So it took a lot of work with a chemist, and to then show this to the world, and as actually a way of innovation for natural dye. At the time, it was what I felt like was what should have been happening naturally, and obviously it's come a lot further now. So what I did do after this collection was take a big breather and go back to the artisanal skill. I went back to Bangladesh. I sat down with the artisans that I work with at Aranya, and I kept making. And the video I'm going to show next is actually a video that I made with them, and I wanted to make this video because for these two collections, I kept talking about these artisans, and then I realized through doing workshops with like Fashion Open Studio, people got to meet them, but people never really got to see how we work together. And so then I created this video, which I'm going to show next, around patchworking a lot of the waste that they had, because I was quite lucky to work with them, because they had this room probably about the size of this room, and I'm going to be honest, it was full of bin bags. Like the woman who runs Aranya in Bangladesh, she is a sustainable icon from then. She started it from 1970s and it's still going, and this room was full of scraps from the 1970s, so you can imagine the dust, and there were a lot of dead animals in there as well. But and then I kind of went through them all, and I started to sort them out and find a way to use them, and now, and it's quite weird to say, it's all used up, and now we're like, okay, now we've got to find another way to do this. But I want to show you the textile that I made with all of the artisanal skills from Bangladesh, which is basically just after the war, because the war happened in 1971, so it's everything after that. If this... One thing is, I also wanted people to see the space. Like a lot of the times whenever I say Bangladesh and I say I make with artisans, people still assume it's going to be in a very dingy, small little room. And I'm like, no, it's actually quite nice. And they work with and this is Shamim. I basically sat with him for ages trying to sort out different shapes of diamonds to patchwork together, so that then they would create a bias. So the bias would go all the way through, and then to get him to understand what I wanted in the end, for it to have this stretch, took a while. But this is a video just to kind of show what he was doing. Where I was really lucky was with some of the textiles were from 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and some were just off the production run, and then being able to mash them all together was a pure joy, and it was just a lot of sorting out through colour, which actually is the longest process. So it ended up being a very expensive textile, but one that was still very much appreciated. but I'll move on, you guys. And it ended up making pieces like this. So I wanted to use this patchwork to make quite contemporary looking things, but because it's on a bias, it would fit to anybody. And this was a collection that I then did during COVID towards the end, just because I had a lot of free time and I was just in my studio trying to make stuff, and really, again, very similar, went back to the intention, and it was about the artisanal skill. But what was missing for me was that I wanted to make clothes for the people around me, because initially I was making stuff for like wholesale, which obviously everyone here who studies fashion will know, like everyone is geared much more towards a linear system where you're designing for wholesale. But I was like, no, I actually want to design for people. So then I started to develop a range of patterns and shapes that were all meant to fit like two of my best friends, basically. One of them, she's 5'10", she has quite big boobs and she's got quite a big bum. The other one is 5'3", and obviously Tasnim, who's like, I love her. She's like very small, petite, doesn't really have a lot of boobs, but has a bum. And then we were like, okay, so they were both very similar size. Like they would, if they were shopping at H&M, they would buy the same size, but it would fit them both very differently. And then this is where I started to have the conversation where I was like, wait, I studied design, surely through pattern cutting you can solve that. Through tailoring you can solve certain issues like that, using stuff like bias and using specific ways of seams. And after maybe 6 months of just working over COVID, where they would come to my studio, I'd put the stuff on them, and I had all this textile that I've made with Aranya, and then constantly going back and forth just to make sure that, one, it also ensures that there's no waste, where it completely fits everyone. And you'll see in the video next where there's 3 different models. They're all wearing the same sample size, but it fits them all really well. And a little thing just about this video before I say, this is a video based around Brick Lane, where I spent a lot of time. So a lot of the communities that I work with were from this area, a lot of the young people, and especially with this fashion film, because it was going to show at Fashion Week through the digital landscapes and through the magazines. I wanted them to see a snapshot of what I saw in that area, because a lot of the times Fashion Week would happen at Truman Brewery, which is like very much in Brick Lane, but there's a very clear divide. There's like one side where there's like lots of vintage shops and artisanal bakeries, and then there's one road called Hanbury Street, and then it goes that side, and it's where everyone kind of basically looks like me, and there's loads of curry houses, and a lot of people venture that way to go for what they think Brick Lane is, but for what my memory of Brick Lane is all that side, and I wanted people to see a snapshot of that.
It says best 10 accountants. Well, this is not coming up.
When I see Simba's downstairs and I go and like joking, and then she hears that I'm there talking to him, and then she wake up and she's like, married the captain. I'm like, wow, you woke up from a deep sleep to tell me that. Violence.
Stunning, black trousers, her face was so cute. Huh? And it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're making breakfast.
Just breakfast. You know what I mean now. Have you seen that meme?
No?
You know.
Wait. Which one?
You're gonna have to find it. Go on Google.
And that was a very short fashion film that I wanted to make, and the voiceover was genuinely a conversation me and my friends had in the studio while we was making it, and it was an audio recording that I was sending on a WhatsApp to a friend of mine. And then when the editor was making this and they were like, what sound do you want, I was like, do you know what, actually just use the audio from that clip, let people hear what I'm really about, and it's about this friendship, which is what the film was about, and that is pretty much all the designing, but I wanted to move on to another project which I worked on, which is for the last 4 maybe years, I've been trying to set up this youth organization, and one where it kind of genuinely helps the young people, because I have, through many conversations with fashion industries all over, a lot of the stuff that people would tell me, being South Asian myself and Muslim, is that there isn't enough South Asian Muslim people. And a lot of the times whenever they speak about that, and my question is, then what are you doing? A lot of the times what they're actioning isn't actually helping, which then I thought, through a lot of the work that I've done, that I could actually help a lot more people, and I started a program called My Home My Bari. Oh, where is it? Here. So this is so it's called My Home My Bari, and I started it in 2020. Oh my god, I'm losing track of time. 21, and this is when I first started securing finance for it, and the whole premise is that Bari means village in both Bengali and in Italian, and the reason why I wanted to make sure that it covered the both countries is because a lot of the Bengali people from Bangladesh migrate to either Italy or to London, the Sylheti community, and a lot of the people who migrated to Italy had then moved to London. So then now we have this like really big diasporic community where there's Bengali kids who speak Italian, English and Bengali, and that like English and Italian is like fashion, beauty combo, but actually they don't get to really use it, and there isn't enough of us in the industry. And because I was very lucky that I had an amazing youth organization who helped me when I was 17 to make it out of the very poor area that I lived in, I wanted to create that exact same system to also give back to the community that I came from. So this is what My Home My Bari was, and I predominantly wanted to work with young women because I just really like working with women, but also just because that's the bracket that really needs the most help. A lot of the Muslim women, they do have degrees, and especially in Tower Hamlets with the data for the Bengali community, is that a lot of the young Muslim women are educated and they do get degrees and they do get BAs and MAs, but then they just don't secure themselves into employment. And this is what I really wanted to bridge that gap, is that actually to secure them and make sure that we help them sustain their employment all the way through, especially in the creative arts. So I work with 14 different young people, and they will explain it a lot better than I will.
And for me, home, politically, I'm an Eastern girl. Emotionally, again, I would say it's where my mother lives. I share the house with my mother, my family, I grew up. Spiritually, I guess spiritually it's, my bedroom is my Zen place.
Home for me today looks different to how other people see home. When I was young, lost my own familial ideas of a home, and then had to rebuild what I thought was a home. And I've been very lucky that I get to build it with my amazing friends and the amazing supporting network that I have around me. And through them, I found that home for me is very holistic. It's not grounded by something geographic, and it's not grounded by bricks and mortar. For me, it's something more. It's an emotion.
We had one room, which was our living room, our sitting room, our bedroom, and then we had another room, which was our kitchen and my bedroom, and which we had a bunk bed in there, and that was very normal for people to have. If you tell anybody now they've got a bunk bed in the kitchen, they'll think you're slightly nutty. But now, but that time it was very normal because there was not enough space.
So it's important for me, I can continue on what my mum set up, which is a really lovely home that we live in, where my kids and their kids can come and stay and play, and it's also a sanctuary for a place where I can work.
I don't usually spend a lot of time in the houses that I live in, because for me they don't feel like home. For me, it's home. For me is in my friends' houses. It's having dinner with them. It's going to like an art exhibition with people who love me and I love them. And I think because I now see home like that, it's different.
So we've got quite a nice community, which is really important for me, knowing that I've got neighbours that got my back.
During COVID, when we had to work almost 18 months from home, the home and my work life completely melded, and sometimes that was a weird space to be. You've got a Zoom call and you're in a blazer and in a tie or looking really professional, and your mum's sort of making curry.
Visually, I'm obsessed with the idea of home, or more so the idea of the home that I grew up in, the home that I had when I was a child and a teenager. I'm obsessed with how the carpet looks, to how the wallpaper was, to how my mum made me feel, to how me and my siblings interacted, to what my dad made us wear, all of those things. And I've taken them into my professional life, and I've used my work and my creative work almost as a way to understand what I really loved about that home and see how can I bring those emotions that that home made me feel in the work that I do. I think the idea of home is transferable. The only way to do that is through emotion.
I've probably got too much stuff in my house, but I don't have an issue with it. It's my house and it's how I like to live. A lot of the stuff is of mine, some of it's of my mum's. We used to go around collecting stuff from jumble sales, and because she was a single parent, we didn't have hardly any money, so everything we've got is a bit chipped and a bit broken. In having that around me, it's kind of a warmth.
So I had previously already done an exhibition inspired by British Bangladeshi homes, especially from the 1970s. It's an era of British Bangladeshi history that I'm very much obsessed with. And I did an exhibition at the Somerset House called the International Fashion Showcase. And through that work, I started to have many conversations around the idea of home, especially with Ruxana. And this is where this project was kind of born. She approached me and asked me to lend my creative eye to the project, and it's now blossomed into this incredible project where we're documenting almost as live history of what the young people really see and are inspired by from the people who came before them, and the vision of what they think British Bangladeshi homes will look like in the future.
Becca and I had a conversation when we were talking about ideas to celebrate Bangladesh 50, and she said, why don't we do an installation? But she hadn't come up with anything else other than that. Then I thought, okay, let me go and approach Rahemur Rahman. I've seen something he's done earlier on in the year in 2019, and I thought, let's try something. And we just tested out the idea, and now we are with funding and doing this lovely project.
What's great about this project for me, it's been another insight into a community that it's not that I'm not close to it, I don't know that community particularly well. I work around the community.
Because home for me is a very holistic thing. Home for me is moving constantly. I want the people who visit this exhibition to feel those emotions, to feel that home is transferable, that it can move. And actually what we love about home is actually the visual references and the visual notes and how they make us feel, and those are the memories that we hold on to, visual memories, for people to really respect and understand it through a very artistic lens. What's really interesting for me about My Home, My Body is that the whole project is inspired by history, and quite a dense history, to be honest, and it's quite a serious history, and a lot has happened in this area and in Brick Lane, and specifically to the British Bangladeshi community. And I think what's really interesting is that young people have taken this as research and as ideas from the ages of like 14 up until 18, what they take forward, because obviously every generation sees a very different history.
You know, you're peeking in, and it's a really privileged thing that you're getting, because you're looking into somebody's life, and again, the community wasn't very flush, they weren't very rich, so you're getting an insight into how people lived, but it's a privileged sort of keyhole you're looking into, and we're really lucky to do this.
And then for that project, I designed this summer workshop where these young people were met with historians from the local university so that they could really understand the local history that they were living in. Because it was only when I was like 24 that I really started to learn about Bangladeshi history, and specifically what happened in the local area to the people, especially with fashion specifically, because obviously the fashion industry in the UK initially was called the rag trade, and obviously that was pretty much held up by the British Bangladeshi community who came there, and obviously just before them, which was the Jewish community who lived in Brick Lane, and it was almost like a passing of communities within that space, and the fashion industry was born in the UK, and still to this day it's quite mad to think that I'm still the only Bengali person who showed at London Fashion Week, which is predominantly what the My Home My Bride program is to hopefully change, and it will, because now we have like 2 Bengali people at St. Martin's, so I'm like, oh, okay, finally. But there's a video straight after this as well, because I just thought it's really important that you all also heard from the young people and why they signed up for this program, because obviously the whole thing was voluntary and it was happening during the summer, so it was during their summer holidays, and getting young people who are like 14, 16, 18 to understand how they could, through design, and actually change the worlds that they live in, and how as artists they actually had a responsibility through dealing with the history that kind of is on their shoulders, whether they want it to be or not. It kind of is, just by the way that they look and the areas that they live in. So I wanted you all to meet them. They're all a little bit older now. So this young girl who's right at the beginning, she's just graduating this year as well from Redesign. So I'm very, very proud of them all. Just trying to find the mouse.
My name is Aisha Siddiqa and I'm 20 years old.
My name is Elima and I'm 19 years old.
My name's Farah and I'm 14.
My name is Nabiha and I'm 19.
My name's Ahmed and I'm 16 years old.
So my name's Sabrina and I'm 16 years old.
My name's Fardeen and I'm 17 years old.
My name is Muhammad Umair Ahmed and I'm 17.
My name is Rosa and I'm 17 years old.
Hi, my name is Najni Firdaus and I am 17 years old.
My name is Anisa and I'm 21 years old. Is that alright?
Yeah.
It's quite amazing to be back here now and to be teaching young people, basically doing exactly what somebody did for me, to give me an opportunity, access to the arts.
So you're kind of like stuck in between, like you kind of have an identity crisis, I guess. So you're either too British when you're in Bangladesh, or you're too not British when you're here as a Bangladeshi. So I thought it would be really nice to like explore my culture through the arts and also learning more about the independence.
It combines 2 things that have recently become something very important to me and my identity, which is art and textiles and things like that, along with Bangladesh and the history of Bangladesh and the importance of knowing about like the country that my parents came from and were born in.
I want to learn about the history of the people in my culture and also about the crafts within my culture as well.
So I actually didn't know a lot about the war. I didn't know a lot about my own history. My parents kept us very secluded away from that part of our identity because they saw it as a survival technique. They wanted us to assimilate into British culture so that we could go quite far. Well, it kind of worked for them, but then now I guess I really want to reconnect with my history. I want to learn about it, and I think through doing this project I've learned so much. I've learned through all the researchers who have come on board, to even stories of the young people and their grandparents.
I can't speak Bengali, but I am Bangladeshi, my parents are Bangladeshi.
I know that there was East Pakistan and West Pakistan after India sort of divided into Pakistan and India.
You see, what I know from school is about Canary Wharf and how loads of Bangladeshis came here, but I never knew about before that, you know, how we were here in this country in the 1600s or in the 50s and 40s.
How they came into a completely new world. It was extraordinary for them. It was out of this world because they're coming from village areas, most of them, and they're coming into like this town. It's all bustling, you know, workers, industrial revolution. So I don't even know how they must have felt, but I know I can get a gist of it.
I think I'm discovering every day something new, and that makes me proud, but also very reflective, because there was so much pain, but from that pain came a new nation.
I've learnt that like there was a lot of violence, and like also that the Bengalis came here like ages before I thought they did. They were here in like the 60s kind of like time, I don't know.
The flag kind of represents, the red bit in the middle represents like the blood and the people who lost lives during the War of Independence.
So I know that the war and independence was fought for to save our language and because there's a lot of discrimination against Bengalis. So that's what we fought for, our culture and our language.
About 3 million Bangladeshi people died in the war, and I know a few stories because my mum was alive during the war and she told me her stories.
I've heard stories about it from like my dad and like my uncles and stuff. You know, we've asked recently to like my uncles like how was it during Bangladesh, like during the war and stuff, and they've told us some pretty traumatic, you know, sort of like what they've witnessed and what they've faced. And now obviously the people that we do want to talk to is my gran, but because of how traumatic their experiences, we don't really want to, like, it's more of like walking on eggshells around her, because it's like it is something that we don't really want her to bring up or like get upset about. When she's ready, she'll tell us and stuff.
When I see young people and working with young people, if we can support their development, make them young people that can express themselves, we're making healthy-minded people for the future. And that's ultimately what we're doing, is that if you can vocalize, if you can express, then you can only be in a positive place with that.
Hearing stories of people from the 70s, hearing stories of people from the 90s, people from like even now, and the similarities and the struggles that they're going through, it's so similar. And I think something needs to change, and I think it's having access points into different points of society that will allow them to be able to move out this area and become affluent in all their many very different ways, is the way that I think the British Bangladeshi community can really prosper. And this is what we ended up making together in the space. So the project halfway through suddenly grew like double the size because of the images around the outside. Because one thing I didn't want to ignore was the fact that even though all of these young women are being so powerful and so amazing to kind of have a message that is passing through them about their grands and their mothers, that actually the men still kind of run the world that they live in, and especially Brick Lane as a community. Because all of the businesses in Brick Lane are owned by men and run by men, and they pretty much make all the decisions in Brick Lane. So a lot of the photo series around the space was of them, but pretty much speaking about the war and how what they had to deal with and why they hold on to this like vision of power that they have. But what really helped me with this project and the young people was to actually see how they can use their creativity to actually make a change, to actually have a voice, and to do something quite amazing. Because one of the girls from the program is at Cambridge now, and she's doing a whole paper and a whole thesis around being British Bangladeshi and specifically the men in the businesses. But she's writing it from the angle of what the mums and wives endured in order for them to be successful businessmen. And I'm just like, and that all happened from her signing up to this program on a whim because her sister is a creative one, and it's quite serendipitous to see how far it's come. And I keep in touch with all of them because they DM me and I always look after them because I always see them as babies, and that community is growing. But where I was really lucky was that from the success of this, I got to do it one more time. And then that's when I thought, okay, where we just touched on the legacies of what the women were holding on their shoulders, we started to unpack that. So then this is where we specifically was asking the women, well, all the young girls, like, how can we redesign that space in order to make the industry better? I won't show that video because that was just but this is what the exhibition space looked like in the end. It was at the Museum of Home in East London, and I worked with a different group of young people where they all specifically were making continuous artwork, but from the point of their grandmas and their mothers. So they, for over like 2 months, they interviewed their family and really understood historically what was happening at that time and actually emotionally what they dealt with. And where I'm very lucky with this program is that now it's becoming an incubator space. So I've just secured funding to do this now for 2 years, where I will look after 8 young designers for 2 years who are from British Bangladeshi background in London, but specifically to help them secure a business and in order to understand finances. So then that initial question of why I initially started of like, why is there enough British Bangladeshi Muslims in the industry? This was my way of saying, here they are. So ultimately, this is what the incubator space is going to end with. And a lot of the meetings I'm having at the moment is with the industry stakes who were asking those questions, like the BFC and a lot of the banks in the area. So the last thing that I wanted to touch on was film. So film is another thing that kind of serendipitously kind of came into my life, and this film specifically, because very similarly to what we was talking about, how we can redesign the worlds that we live in, is something quite very similar to I guess even the design and even anything. Something traumatic happened, and then I kind of was like, what am I going to do with it? And so this is an image of Momo, who's a trans Hijra woman from Bangladesh. But what happened was that when I was in Bangladesh making textiles for the fashion work, I was assaulted by a group of the trans women in Bangladesh. So where two things, I could have done two things. I could have either got really angry and kept that anger and stayed with it, or I could have done what I'm very happy that I did do, which is come back and research. I was like, wait, why is someone who is trans looking at someone who's very visibly queer and still attacking me? It's like, if she asked me, I would have given everything. So then that was the emotional part that drove me the whole time. I was like, what has the world done to them to go into such a space that this is what they're doing? And so then working with the Human Rights Watch, where I suddenly became a new gen person for them as well, is that I found out a lot of the data that's around the trans people is very slim. There isn't a lot of actual information about them, even though there's on record 14 NGOs in Bangladesh who work with the trans community, but the data they have is very different to the lived experience that I saw. So initially it started off as a project where I was going to take my fashion collection, I was going to find the trans girls, was going to do a little collection, do a little photo shoot for Vogue, and all of these things were still centering me. And this is when I was again, very similar to what I was saying earlier, it was I had to sit back with my intention. I was like, what are you actually doing this for? And it was to actually help these women. So I was like, wait, what's the best way to get people to see emotion? And I love watching documentaries, and that's when, and I know it's a massive feat, and it's probably the queer in me to kind of go, I think I could do that. So I initially was like, okay, cool, we'll make a documentary. Let people watch the documentary, and then once they see the charity collaborators that we are working with, then they'll just fund the people. And that's ultimately, in a very pure, simple way to put it, is what we did. I over 6 months spoke to all of the NGOs that were working in Bangladesh with the trans community, and those meetings, and I don't know if anyone's worked in the corporate industry, is very boring, but then there was two who I really loved. One is called Shampukone Setu, which is run by a woman who is trans herself. This is the only one that was actually spearheaded by a trans woman, so obviously I had to work with her, and she is phenomenal. She looks after 600 trans women who live all over Bangladesh, very much on the grassroots. But then I needed two, because I was like, I need someone grassroots and someone legal, because I can't do either, but the film will need it. Less so the film, but more all the viewers who see it and want to do something also will also want to know where to go to. So then I worked with Bangu Welfare Society, they work with the government and they work with the legal. So making sure over the 10-15 years they've been together, working at trying to tackle the legislation in Bangladesh around trans communities. So this is where the sweet spot is, this film, where we are hoping that people watch the film and they understand empathetically what these women are going through. And the way that I kind of wanted to tell this story with a friend of mine, Lily Vetch, is so I grew up watching Sex and the City a lot, so I really loved the idea of watching 4 women be very fabulous, and I just thought and obviously the women that I met was so fabulous. I was just like, wait, everyone's always talking about they're just having such a hard time, and they are, and it's not that they're not, but what people always forget in a lot of the trauma that they read, especially in data and stats, is that they're human, that they actually have great memories and they're having great times, and even though they're living in a shack that we think, oh my god, poor them, they're living in it thinking, oh, wow, I've got running water and I've got food, and they're having quite a great time. So over the 4 years, and obviously now we're just going into edit, so the little trailer that you're going to see is all the stuff from 2019. So over that time, from then to now, it's grown into quite a big project, and I'm very lucky to say that we have an incredible production company now in Finland. We have a great editor who just won an Academy Award. We have a sound engineer who's just won an Oscar. So I'm just it's quite ridiculous, it's quite crazy to think that just because, and very similar to the idea of design, just because we thought we could, to be honest, you all can, and it's very much that, and the film is called Body of Our Own. Body of My Own. It was called Body of Our Own, but then we changed it to My Own because we realised when you translate into different languages, it does Body of Our Own doesn't translate so well. So it's now called Body of My Own. But this is another character, Nishi. But I thought I'd put the logline here just to really help everyone understand exactly what it's about. It's about 4 Muslim Hijra women in Dhaka, Bangladesh, as they fight for agency and control over their bodies in a community that too often confines them to sex work and begging. As the pandemic hits, they embark on dangerous journeys across South Asia in order to survive. And they're quite dangerous. But in the trailer that I'm going to show, that part isn't shown because it's from 2019, but I want to see how can I get this to play.
নারীর স্ত্রীলিঙ্গ নাই, নারীর মতন দেহ নাই, বডি নাই, ঠিক আছে, কিন্তু আমার ভিতরটা নারীর মতন কাজ করে।
ঠিক আছে, এটা বুঝাইলাম আপনাকে যে কাগজের ফুল যতক্ষণ ভালো থাকে, হ্যাঁ, যতদিন শো থাকে, ভালো থাকে, ততদিন ঘরেই থাকে। হয়তো যখন ফুলটা নষ্ট হয়ে যায় তখন কি বাইরে।
বললাম না যে জন্ম থেকে জ্বলছি, এই পর্যন্ত জ্বলতে জ্বলতে আসছে। এর মাঝে সুখ আছে, দুঃখ আছে, কষ্ট আছে, আবেগ আছে, ভালোবাসা আছে, সব কিছু নিয়ে, এবং বিশাল বড় একটা আশাও আছে।
The premise of the film was actually just to help this community, and during COVID, because obviously we first started filming in 2019, then COVID happened, so we had to take a massive break, and then we just thought our aim was to help these women, and obviously during COVID they were really badly hit because obviously the government weren't helping them, and so under pseudonames, and to be honest the girls found out it was us anyway, but we started with a pseudonym so they wouldn't know it was us. Started a fundraiser and we raised over £10,000 for them, which works out to a ridiculous amount in Bangladesh. So we ended up helping sustaining the lives of over 532 women for over a year, and then a lot of the money that was left over went straight to the grassroots charity, and to be honest they are still working with that money and still helping the women, because a lot of them, as soon as the lockdown restrictions lifted, they could continue back into the sex work that they were doing, but for a long time a lot of them, and some of them did die, which is the saddest truth, but they just didn't have food to eat, and because people weren't helping them. So this is where, and I really do believe design can really actually help us all change everything that we see. And I know it all started from fashion design, but and I really hope you agree as well, fashion kind of like meanders through all of them, down to even the way that this is shot. Like I very clearly knew what I wanted it to look like, how it to be a visual story, a landscape, and color. And if you haven't seen, like, I love color. Like, I'm obsessed with pink. So everything, there's like a shade of pink in everything, and the combination of pink and green, and a lot of the ethics and principles that I still live by. Pretty much, I started from right at the beginning, and no matter what I kind of like use it towards, it doesn't, that those principles and ethics never really shift that much. And for me, what I always find quite exciting is I don't know what problem I'm going to see next, and I kind of hope I don't try to find a solution for it, but that's what I find exciting, is that I've already seen that I can somewhat do it. Like you can kind of, if you see a problem, you can kind of find a way that you can redesign it to kind of create a solution, and that is ultimately me. And this is where I open up to you. And obviously I'm not. Thank you.
Just grab this because it's being filmed and the sound is going through there, and it'd be great for your questions to speak into the microphone. Thank you so much for this.
No, thank you.
Your journey in such an honest way, an open way with us. Are there any questions? I'll start with a question. Because I think your journey, I think is so fascinating because you work in so many different capacities. And I'm wondering, as an educator in your role at Central St. Martin's, where you started, how are you enabling students to not hit the same void that you did when you first graduated there? Because there seems to be something coming full circle here.
I think it's getting them to understand design. And actually, a lot of the times, even though we're enrolled into a fashion design course, ultimately it's design that we're looking at, and how you can kind of take those core components, whether you're looking at design for the body, or you design in politics, or design in cloth, or design in textiles. For me, I really do believe design is design. And a lot of the students that I do teach, I've been teaching, so the other thing I didn't say, I'm also the head of the first year on the BA Fashion at Central St. Martin's, and I've been there now for 2 years. So where I'm really lucky is I've hopefully over the next 3 years I'll get to see the people that I've first taught, the impact that I've made on their education. But I've already seen now over the 1 year the impact, because actually a lot of them are really thinking about how they can redesign the models that they've always believed that they should follow, but completely from the get-go. Because even though they're very young, like some of them are like 18, 19, I kind of tell them that they can do it. And I'm like, hey, you want to start selling that thing? You're never going to learn. You're like, there isn't going to be this like miraculous moment when you've graduated and you're going to have a business. Like, do it now. Do it on your Instagram, make stuff for your friend, really understand what it is you're doing. And through doing that, you're actually going to find this, and which is what I really value about what I teach, is that I get to kind of say that to them and then watch them do it and then be like, what did you learn? Did you see that you could do it? And especially with the ones who come from communities where they really have something to talk about, to see them like really succeed in it, is like my sweet spot. Like someone who comes to mind is I've got an Arab student called Zara, and she is from Dubai, so she also comes from a very wealthy background. So she had this like very confused state that she was in. She was like, I'm wealthy, I'm from Dubai, but also the Arab state is like going through a lot of stuff with women's rights. How do I voice it? And then I was just like, well, you've got to, and this is where I'm very lucky. With every project I've done, I had a lot of researchers around me who helped me understand the data and the stats. And I was like, well, you can't speak on something unless you know about something. So she is now, she's in first year now, so she's just finishing. And towards the end of this year, she realized she actually wanted to speak about it. So I was like, now is your chance. You need to go and learn up, like go learn all the data, learn all the stats, and through learning, seeing all that, quite to be honest, it's a lot of information. You'll find the sweet spot. You'll find where you can come in to fix things, because ultimately with all of these issues, we're not going to fix all of them. No one person is going to do all of them, but you can kind of take your little corner of it and try to fix those bits. And I think that's where I'm quite lucky that I get to do with the first year there, is that full circle thing, is kind of give them the confidence that no one kind of gave me when I was starting there. Because when I was starting there, everyone was just trying to get us to start businesses and show at Fashion Week, and now I'm like, hey, no, start a business and change the world, which sounds really big, but obviously I'm just like, if you can change the world in a very small part, you've already made it a little bit better. Like that's, and I always say that, and they do it now, which is quite nice.
Great, thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for the presentation.
No,
I have a comment and then a question, if that's okay.
Anything.
Yeah, I just want to say I totally value your perspective and point of view, resonate with so much of it. I also used to work in an NGO space in girls' education, which is my entry point into sustainable fashion.
Yeah.
Just knowing the intersections of all of that. And my question to you is, as I understand, you're an educator and you teach at a fashion design school, Central St. Martin's, right? And there's no wrong or right answer or to this question, but I just wanted to get your perspective, because one of the things that I get a little bit overwhelmed with working in this industry is like the level of overproduction that we have. And so you have a lot of people who ask me, like, should I just start my own line? And I'm hesitant to tell them yes, because of the overproduction problem. If you look at the issues of waste, especially, waste colonialism and things like that, right? Like, the idea of producing new things, even though we do need them, it does give me personally a little bit of anxiety. So I'm just curious to hear your perspective on like starting new businesses and designing and all of that. And how do you, kind of get these designers ready for the world, knowing that we do have an overproduction problem and, yeah.
Oh.
Just curious to hear.
I mean, to be honest, it's very as simple as talking about it. Because what I found, and obviously, especially at St. Mines, is that some people are genuinely not interested in sustainability, but the hard bit is getting them to care. And the way that I found that I get them to care is to talk about something that they do care about and how sustainability will impact that. So one thing that I always kind of say as jokes, like obviously, and it helps them to understand, is that a lot of them love Venice, and I'm just like, and obviously a lot of them won't love Bangladesh and stuff like that, because obviously I know that's going to go underwater in 2050, but I'm like, you love Venice. I was like, 2040, like that's not even that, like a lot of that's going to be here because of climate change. And they're like, what? And I think it's just getting very similar with the film, just getting people to have the empathy to actually care. But even then we still have the hurdles of they actually don't know how to action if they do care. And then this is where it all genuinely comes in, because I think it's then getting them to look at the system and actually really think about how they can redesign that. So if, especially because there's mass production everywhere, it's getting them to think about actually the most sustainable thing and getting them to actually own that. And I say very openly in classrooms, like the most sustainable thing, if all of us really wanted to be sustainable, is we would just stop studying fashion and just choose a different career, probably in like water or like healthcare or something like that. But I was like, but ultimately we're all here with a creative agenda, like our body wants us to do this. So if you are going to do it, find a little remit within it that you can handle. And obviously these are students we're talking about, so obviously they're like young, so obviously to get them to think about this massive picture is very overwhelming. So I'm just like, look at the small. I was like, look in your hometown, what's the small problem that you can deal with? And where in a design project where nothing's actually going to be implemented, let's map it out. Let's actually see what that looks like. If you was to die in your town in Italy, what would that look like for the people who live there? Really look at the research around it, and I think that's the best way to kind of get them to understand it, because if we don't help having better designers, actually the world is just going to keep being worse, because ultimately the designers are actually doing all of that. They're designing the houses that we are seeing as unsustainable, they're designing the water systems, and I know this by having friends in corporate, a lot of the times they grab from the creative industry to get them to design for them. So I know that it all ultimately sits down to design. Even the way cities are planned out, where we're thinking, like incredible sustainable cities, like there's some like Sweden, like they take incredible designers. And I just think it's just, especially on a fashion design course where students are no longer thinking about clothing or just clothing, is that we have to get them to think about all of that. Because it's no longer just about clothes. Like, it sadly isn't. Like, anyone who wants to be a fashion designer, you're not just making clothes anymore. You've really got to think about down to the seed that's put in the soil, to the fiber. You have a say in every part of that, and you as a designer have to vocalize that at every point, to, like we were talking about earlier, like to the manufacturer, to the person who's sewing it, to the client who's going to buy it off you, to the person who puts the seed in. You have a say. And if you don't have a say, you ultimately have the power to move your money, and that has a lot of power. I hope that answers your question. That was such a long one.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Can you hear me from back here?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Abby. Well, thank you for your talk, but many of us are communications students.
Mm-hmm.
Interested in kind of pursuing careers in fashion, more the corporate side. I'm just kind of wondering, what's your advice for us going into that industry, and how we can kind of hopefully align our values and what we care about in kind of this corporate society where the aim is really to make money and grow businesses, if that makes sense. How can we kind of like tap into the values and ethics of that?
I don't know if this is the right answer to tell you as a student, but just what I tell a lot of my students is if you're trying to go into a corporate machine that is very set in the way that it wants to run, and you as a very new person into that company is trying to change that, realistically over the 5-10 years you might stay at that company, you're not really going to change a lot. And this is from anyone who has friends who are like slightly older who are trying to do those things. I'm watching them do it. They really do struggle. What I will say is the way you will have the power as a young person, and I really do hope all you as young people see, is that your power is a collective. You actually, if you move them away from being positions of power and you create your own networks that are truly sustainable, like imagine if you started your own comms company that actually used everything was ethical, down to the computer, the energy you used in the room, to the paper you printed on, to the magazine, to everything communication based, that you designed everything from the beginning to the end, and actually thought about the depth of the communication that you created too, because I think a lot of the times in the communication departments, especially in PR, people don't think about the depth of it, like especially like because in fashion we think about it a lot now, but like when you produce a magazine or a book, what happens to that book? Where does it end up? Have you created a system for that to end? And if you as young people, as innovative people, kind of come together and kind of create your own agency, hopefully in the next 5-10 years, instead of working for a corporate place and having someone keep telling you no, you can start your own company where you can keep saying yes, and you become a power where you kind of are fighting against them. And then the people who we see as the bad wolves will no longer be bad wolves, because then all the white angels will be running the industries, and that's actually the dream. Well, that's the vision that I hopefully have. And I don't know if that gives you hope, but I kind of do hope that gives you hope, because, and I'm sure you see a lot of the people who run the industries are not as sustainable as they say they are. The worst thing is when you go into them and then you're secured on a contract and you're like, wow, I can't get out. And then that's when I would say, have the agency to kind of start your own thing. Try it out on Instagram. Instagram's always a good test, or a TikTok. It really is.
Thank you. I wonder if you could also reflect. On the role of communication in your own work, because you have I think from what I gather in when we last spoke and what you talked about today, you have a strong vision of communication around the work that you're doing. But you probably also collaborated with people who communicated with you, for you. So I think that could also be very interesting for our students to reflect a little bit on the role of communication, strategies of communication, and maybe also places where students can move into, because I think communication for social transformation is a huge
space now, yeah. I think for me, with all the communication that I've created, and please tell me if it's not coming across, is I wanted people to care. It's like, for me, my agenda was, how can I get someone to care about something that they know nothing about? And it's that for me, it always came down to very core denominators of like loss, grief, love, trauma. These are all emotions that we all feel. And I just kind of think if we lead with those, especially if we're trying to make change, that's kind of what I kind of think is working, is that it's the best way to kind of get people to care, because then if people care, then they'll kind of join your cause. And it's the same thing with a lot of fashion communication. I just think if they lead with the empathy, then they'll understand, like if somebody actually started to speak about the artisanal skill, like Dior had a very big missed opportunity in Mumbai to actually bring the artisans to the forefront, that through communication would have been a very clear message that they would have sent to the world, like, oh no, this is what we care about, this is what we're doing it for. But they chose other decisions, and this is where I think communication comes into it, where you actually have to question yourself, what do I care about? And actually, you've actually got to be very honest with yourself. With a lot of times, you might not care, and actually that's just true. But then, if you did try to show the world that you did it, people feel the inauthenticity, which I'm sure a lot of you as communications people will critique. Like you can see it in the industry. So this way, you've almost got to be honest with yourself, and then kind of like find the way to do that. But genuinely, I would say, emotions. Like I would find a way in the most humanistic level, in the most simplified sentence that you could make it, how can somebody else understand it? Because a lot of the times we're all talking about an intersection that other people haven't experienced, because especially now everyone's talking about their lived experience, like it's very linear. How can I care about someone who is a woman who lives in like, who's white and lives in America? Like I don't know what her life is like, but I can, through emotion I can care about her, which is something that I learned through film. And to be honest, that's why I really love film, and film resonates for a lot of the stuff that I do, because that's what they do. They get you to care about this character because her mum is ill, or she gets you to care about this character, and it's very similar in fashion. I think if we got people to care about the people behind the scenes, then we would care about them at the front. I hope that answered the question. I don't know. I answer things so long-winded, I don't know why I do it.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for now?
I wondered if you have any reading recommendations for us, any favorites of yours that you've gotten a lot of takeaways from.
To be honest, and this is where I'm going to be so real, and this is why I'm a very visual person, my brain just does not do reading. But what it does do is documentaries. I watch a lot of documentaries, and I will say, if anyone has a specific field that they're into, there's amazing documentaries on YouTube. YouTube is the best place to start, especially for the data and the stats, because one thing that I really enjoyed was reading these like very heavy papers from Human Rights Watch, and then watching a documentary to be like, and that was the information that stayed in my head when I saw the woman sat on the banks of the river looking at the water go into her house, and I'm like, okay, that's the issue, rather than hearing on a paper where 32 million did a displaced. I'm like, that doesn't pull me. But I would say DW is a great channel for documentaries, and Vice. I say that while they've also done very problematic things, but obviously everyone can't be perfect. But those would be great places to start, and I would say documentary has helped me understand a lot of climate issues, because that's the first time that I really saw them. And to be honest, especially in Bangladesh, like, when you see it in front of you, you can't deny it. It's real. But yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we'll move over to more informal conversations now. We have a little apéro at the back. But I want to just, thank you so much for really sharing this story. And I think the honesty is rare in this business. And also that mixed with the empathy and the love and the political sense that you bring, I think is really inspiring, and is also, I think, fantastic for us. It's the first day of the summer course here, setting ourselves up for an exploration in sustainability in fashion and exploration of fashion systems, so two very political courses. And I think you've given us a fantastic start. Thank you really so much for joining.
And do ask questions. I'm here.